morning. Is that all right?
Yeah. That's great.
Yeah.
And I'll ask Gino a question as well, just about the Morning Ireland.
Yeah. Okay, well, today is the first day back of the Dáil, and there's a few issues that People Before Profit intend to highlight. First of all, later today, the Taoiseach, Leo Varadkar, is going to be going off to Davos, and we want to highlight the fact that, as the Oxfam report indicated this week, Davos is a gathering of the world's super rich, of multinationals, and it really epitomises the gross and growing inequality in wealth that exists globally and in Irish society. And while, some sinister and nasty forces on the far right want to blame desperate and vulnerable refugees fleeing war and poverty, really it is gatherings like Davos that epitomise the absolutely gross inequality and the real problem in our society, which is the gross inequality in the distribution of wealth. The Oxfam figures are shocking, showing the number of people now in Irish society with wealth more than 4.7 million has doubled in the last number of years to being over 20,000 people, and that the richest 1% of Irish society have more than a quarter of all the wealth, while the poorest 50% have only 1.1% of the wealth. That is the real problem, and we're going to be asking the Taoiseach today, will he, given that absolutely shocking level of inequality, the crushing blows of the cost of living and the housing crisis, will he now endorse the call by Oxfam and for many years People Before Profit for a wealth tax that would be levied on those who have more than €4 million in wealth, which could raise an astonishing 8 billion in extra tax revenue. Just imagine what 8 billion could do to address the housing crisis, to address the cost of living crisis, to address the crisis in our health service. That's the real problem, and we think it is long overdue that we introduce a wealth tax in order that the wealth of Irish society is actually shared fairly to ensure a decent standard of living and decent public services for everybody. The other thing we want to really strongly highlight over the coming days is our absolute opposition to what is a absolutely scandalous proposal for Coillte the State Forestry Company to team up with a private for-profit investment fund, Gresham House from the UK, to buy up tens and tens of thousands of hectares of Irish land and forestry for profit. It amounts to privatisation of huge amounts of Irish land and Irish forestry for the benefit of global investment funds, which will actually worsen an already dysfunctional forestry model, will do nothing for small farmers, will do nothing for communities, will do nothing for biodiversity or climate change, but is just about a land grab and a forestry grab by for-profit interests. And we will be calling on the government to immediately abandon this privatisation deal with Gresham House for a grab of Irish forestry and Irish land. And indeed, we are working with environmental groups, small farmer groups, to organise protests. And last Thursday at the Dáil Business Committee, I asked for an urgent Dáil debate on the Gresham House Coillte forestry deal, and we will be raising that again, because it is absolutely unacceptable that huge amounts of land should be handed over to a for-profit investment fund to make money out of forestry rather than developing forestry in the common public interest. Do you want to ask about the other thing, or will we do this other stuff first?
Well, if you want to do the other stuff first.
I'll just be very brief just in relation to the ongoing crisis in kind of our ED departments. And obviously the HSE were in at the Health Committee yesterday, and they laid out their kind of, I suppose, their critique on what has happened. The winter plan has basically been ripped up in relation to a new plan of crisis management, and this seems to be a perpetual crisis that happens on a yearly basis in relation to ED departments. And I think there's very legitimate questions in relation to why this keeps happening. People that are on trolleys for days on end not getting medical intervention when they need it will lead to kind of people dying. and that's just absolutely unacceptable in a very wealthy country. So we'll be raising it with the Taoiseach today and Minister Donnelly tonight in relation to the ongoing situation in our ED departments and what actually should be done. Obviously this is a kind of legacy issue in relation to lack of capacity. I mean, amazing enough, 40 years ago Ireland had 7,000 more hospital beds than they have now. So it's capacity. Obviously the government have had additional 1,000 beds in the last 3 years, but we need much more beds in our health service, and also the staff well-being is very, very important. The amount of stress that healthcare staff are in at the moment is off the Richter scale, and that can actually lead on to a huge amount of stress in some of these environments. So it's really important that the government address these issues immediately. Thank you.
So the jobs massacre in the tech industry continues. The latest announcement we have is expected from Microsoft. The speculation that there will be 11,000 jobs axed globally, 5% of their workforce. Microsoft employed 3,500 people in this state. That would work out at about 175 job losses here in Ireland. Comes on top of job losses at Twitter, Meta, Stripe, and expected losses at Amazon. Now, we have a new Minister for Enterprise, Trade and Employment. Simon Coveney is in the post now. He needs to come out and make a statement about this situation and what the government intend to do. One point that we would raise in that regard, workers have a right to organise, but workers also need to have the right to full recognition when there are issues at stake in terms of wages, in terms of conditions and in terms of jobs. And the government's opposition to mandatory trade union recognition is a barrier in the way of workers in the tech industry organising and being fully represented on these issues that are being discussed at the moment. So basically our call here is Minister needs to speak on this issue, and mandatory trade union recognition is something that we will be pushing for very strongly. I'll leave it at that.
I want to ask about the defective apartments and also about Paschal.
Okay, grand, yeah.
We'll start with the defective apartments. The Housing Minister has just outlined a scheme to repair thousands of defective apartments. Your reaction to that? Does the scheme go far enough? And does it deal with the problems that the builders seem to have been able to? There's no real comeback for builders who build these apartments.
Yeah, well, we need to see the detail. I mean, people before profit have been very clear and for a long time calling for absolute guaranteed 100% redress, including retrospection for those who've already had to pay out tens of thousands to deal with the lack of proper fire safety in their apartments, water ingress, and the consequences of cowboy builders during the Celtic Tiger that were allowed run riot because of light touch regulation brought in by successive Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael governments during that time. So we want to see 100% redress, guaranteed, and retrospection for everybody who has already had to fork out in order to ensure the safety and quality of the apartments or houses that they live in. And we also believe that we need a state construction company. We need the state to directly provide the capacity and resources to actually remediate homes which are currently unsafe for tens of thousands of people.
What about the people who built the apartments? Should there be any action there?
Without a shadow of a doubt. We need a levy imposed on the construction industry, on the property developers, to pay for what they did. And those responsible, some of whom are still in business, still building, should be paying for the remediation. But obviously that shouldn't be a block on the state immediately guaranteeing full remediation and full retrospection for the tens of thousands of people whose homes are defective from fire safety or water ingress point of view.
Can I ask you about another issue? Paschal Donohoe will make a statement to the Dáil later on this evening in relation to the controversy over his election posters. What do you want to hear from Paschal?
Well, I think we want to hear how on earth you can stand over a situation where you're getting a political donation from somebody involved in a major engineering company who then ends up on the board of a extremely important agency, the Land Development Agency, because to us this just smacks of the continuation of the toxic relationship between Fine Gael, Fianna Fáil in particular, and big business interests. And that sort of rotten relationship that was exposed in the Mahon Tribunal, that was supposed to be a thing of the past, but this certainly suggests that rotten relationship continues, and that is not acceptable, particularly from a minister.
Is it a resignation matter?
Well, I certainly think depending on the answers we hear and whether they're credible or not credible, question marks certainly have to exist over the future of a minister, because we're talking about the finance minister, and we're talking about a situation where you're getting a political donation from somebody who then ends up on a very important state board dealing with huge amounts of public resources, land and the housing crisis.
Well, I think it's important to counter some of the misinformation and untruths that fascist groups are, spewing out. Some people will fall for it. The vast majority of people will not fall for it. That's very, very important. And obviously, as public representatives, we do get sometimes quite a robust criticism, and there's a certain criticism that comes with this job, and we understand that. But there's certain stuff that goes well beyond the kind of remit of criticism. And when people put pictures of your house to say that your house is going to be burnt down or you're going to be killed, that's a line that crosses all boundaries. And I mean, it's the police. I think it's the issue. Anybody that makes them threats, obviously the guards should be involved. I mean, obviously I informed the police about that kind of threat, and obviously there's limits to what they can do. I'm sure they will kind of try to investigate it, but I think this has to be taken very, very serious. Marching on people's homes is just not acceptable. And these fascist elements have to be called out what they are. They're absolute violent thugs, and they're willing to use violence not only against public representatives, but I'd be more worried is actually asylum seekers. That's the kind of rhetoric that they use, and it's not all bluster. As we've seen, it's been used against public representatives and people of colour and asylum seekers. So it's really important that we challenge this and confront it.
And are Gardaí doing enough to protect the security of public representatives?
Well, obviously, yeah, they've obviously given us guidance in relation to our clinics, in relation to our homes and so forth. But fascist elements in this country think they can actually say anything, which they do. They don't care about the truth, and actually put things up online without any repercussions. And there has to be repercussions. If you say to somebody, look, I'm going to burn your house down online, obviously the social media companies have a duty as well. We're also the police, and obviously there's limits to what they can do. But surely, if somebody is saying that publicly, social media companies have an obligation to not only myself and my family to actually take this person offline, because that's the option that they have. And if you give them option, they keep breathing. And but the vast majority of people see through this. They see through all the toxic kind of untruths that they say, and vast majority of people will not fall for it. And that's why it's important to challenge this, no matter where this virus goes to.